The police commissioner is out, yet the problems continue. Some have renamed Baltimore Murder City, a title that was previously held by Detroit. More and more, Baltimore looks like Ferguson, Missouri, and less like Charleston, South Carolina. Why? What can the state do to help? And what does the city of Baltimore need to do? How about the federal government? Should more officials be replaced? What about the unions? Can we get our charm city back? And finally, is this a racial issue or just poor leadership? Ashley, what do you think?
Well, I think a couple things. I work in Baltimore every day. My business is in Baltimore. I have to tell you, Baltimore is not Murder City. I drive the streets of Baltimore. I walk the streets of Baltimore all day long. And I think that we have a very suburban perspective here when we really reduce Baltimore down to, you know, a crazy all-around ghetto. Baltimore is an incredibly diverse city. You could spit and land on a drastically different culture of neighborhood. Baltimore is incredibly dynamic, and if we see the history of Baltimore over the past 30 years, riots aren't unpeculiar, you know, riots are a normal thing for Baltimore if you look at it over the past, you know, 4 or 5 decades. But if you really think about it this way, so with Baltimore, with riots, think about riots. It's not something that one arm of culture handles, right? Riots are an uprising of discontent. Not to be too Marxian, but you know, it's the uprising of a disenfranchised people against an ultimately unfair reality. So you can't blame the government. You can't blame the police commissioner. You absolutely can.
Yes,
you can blame them for how they handled the situation. But if you're actually talking about the impact of the riots, which I have to tell you, as somebody that is a broker of fine wine, my business was drastically impacted by the riots. My business in Baltimore fell 40%, and I'm still climbing back from it. There is a real impact to these kinds of things. But you can't blame it on a race.
But
you can't blame it on an individual.
Perhaps not, but you can look at the social situation which helped create it and look at the different factors that did that, and government does play a role in that.
Especially local government.
Plays a role, but
look, what do Detroit and Baltimore have in common? 40 years worth of unfettered liberal policies that have failed the least among the population of that.
I need to flip that on you, and I need to tell you that what they have in common
more. Republicans had no hand in that. Conservatives had no hand in that.
What they had in common more was a very prolific industrial complex that over the past 30 years has completely fallen out. Through what? An inability to retain businesses.
Right, because they tax them too highly to pay for all these other policies that do not work.
I think that's probably simplifying it a bit.
It also has a lot to do with outsourcing. If you talk about the major businesses in each of these areas, it has mostly to do with federal taxes. It has mostly to do with the federal atmosphere and the encouragement of outsourcing.
Then why does North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, all these places, why are they gaining business?
Because of the massive incentives on small businesses like Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, which had a massive tax incentive to come to North Carolina.
Sure.
Absolutely,
and the thing is,
which has absolutely nothing to do with parties, my friend.
So it does. It absolutely does. One party, one side of government is for less taxes.
I just like these reductionist arguments where we
it might be
down
reductionist,
to party.
but it works because it's true.
We're talking about a real issue here, and I think Carl hit on something very important, which is looking at not just the symptoms.
We need to look at the cultural factors of it, and we look strictly at economics, and we look at conservatism, if we want to do that. Then we look at all the very conservative states in the South, which are among the poorest in the country. So let's not go there. There are a lot more complex
No, we can
factors.
go there because here's why. In Charleston, which is a rich city, don't get me wrong, but when that shooting there, you saw how the population reacted there. And that is a population that, first of all, hasn't had its family structure completely destroyed by the perverse incentives of liberalism. You have a family structure that still believes in certain things, and that was a totally different, it was the same kind of situation.
It was
and they reacted
very
You know,
differently.
there's something to be said about the difference between a black kid getting shot in the streets and people getting shot in a church, and how it is identified in the media, how easy it is to take massive sympathies on something that we hold sacred versus something that we as a culture dismiss.
Well,
But I saw black leaders in Charleston basically say, Al Sharpton, keep out.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a cancer everywhere he goes. He's a horrible human being.
I think we should actually get back to the issue, which is the city
Well,
of
okay,
Baltimore.
well then
all part of the issue.
I'll chime in because the issue is Baltimore any better off now without the police commissioner than what it was? And I'm going to tell you it's not. And I'm going to tell you that the mayor of Baltimore, if we could ever, and they probably don't have one, but if we could ever recall any mayor in the history of the United States, she would have to be the one to be recalled. You know, when you have a mayor say, stand down, let him go, give him space. I'm telling you, give them space. Give them space does not mean throw rocks at police officers.
No,
that's not give them
I
space.
think that it is absolutely an appropriate response. You're talking about a force that no matter what they do, they're going to be ostracized and they could possibly be killed for something. I mean, you have to understand riot culture and how to deal with riot
I understand the
culture.
riot culture. I've been in them.
Riot culture is like the biggest kid. Riot culture is like a big giant kid throwing a tantrum in the middle of the street.
And it just needs a bigger bullet.
Yeah.
No, what it needs is you to take a step back, let it have its tantrum, and figure out what the root of this issue is.
So you had
Not-
businesses
not
that were
at the time
destroyed,
the
you had
riot is
businesses that
going
were
on,
burned
no.
down, you had a retirement center that was being funded by a church, burnt to the ground.
What did CVS,
wasn't even done yet.
What did CVS have
And
to do
that's-
with any of this?
Oh yeah, CVS, right. I mean,
There
but
are
the point
plenty
is,
of for-profit and non-profit places that burned to the ground or in the aftermath went out of business. I have clients that went out
I
of
don't
business.
want to
as a
understand
result of
riots.
this.
I want them to be
What
put
I'm
down.
telling
Yeah.
you is we need to understand that when you're dealing with a riot culture, you're dealing with an angry populace. They're usually angry for a reason. When we engage
maybe
in these
two-
reductionist
maybe
arguments,
things
maybe
Hold on a
10%
second.
are angry for
Hold
a
on
reason.
a
The other
second.
90% are taking advantage of a situation.
And these reductionist arguments where we say the catchphrases, liberalism, blah, 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 where we say all these things that tend to piss people off, all of a sudden we're not focused on the issue. We're just ticking each other off
So
and
what they
engaging
need-
in a fight just
They
like
need
the
more
people on the
government? Is that what they
streets.
need, more government?
I think we need a realistic conversation. This one has not been one. I really think that we need to
But I think
understand
the
that
time
the
for that
judgment
realistic
should come
conversation.
after consideration.
By-
And we're too on this thread of trying to find somebody to blame that we're not actually
Because
solving.
there
But
is
that
somebody to blame.
conversation and a conversation with how to deal with a riot at the time that it occurs are two very different things, I think. You cannot talk a riot down. We tried that in the
Exactly.
60s and it didn't work.
Exactly.
You cannot talk a riot down. You have to deal
No
with it
problem
in
with
terms
that.
of force. And I'm a relatively liberal individual, but when it comes to a riot, you have to deal with it with force. There's no other way around it. If it comes to a riot situation, South Carolina is different because the riot never erupted for any number of difference in social issues.
Well,
Now, we also had the question of whether or not the federal government has a role to play in any of this. What do you guys think? Federal government role in this? Not a role in this?
well, the
consider
liberal
now-
federal government.
Well, any,
I
just
had to do
consider
that.
the federal government in general. Does
Other
it have a legitimate role to play
other
in
than the
something like
military
this?
during the thing, probably not.
Well,
It should be faced
Posse
locally.
Comitatus disallows the
So
military
I
from being
understood that,
injected
but they were
at all.
there. But what
The
I'm saying,
National Guard may have been,
Right.
but the military was not.
what I'm saying is, other than helping restore order, then no, I think it should be taken care of locally.
Okay.
The best government's local government.
Well, in that case, federal government has no role because the federal government has no role in restoring
Right.
order in a domestic event, or at least it's not supposed to.
Well, you know, I mean, and we can sit here and we can talk about the cultural differences that are in Baltimore. Because I know there were people who protested peacefully in Baltimore also during
Right,
this.
and I also
Yeah.
saw.
There was
And
a
believe me,
drastic
I
Did
difference.
you see
I
those black individuals that formed a line in front of the police?
To
Yes,
defend the
the
And
protest,
that
yeah.
was
Yes.
that meant, man, that
Yeah.
warmed my heart. It was beautiful.
So
Beautiful
those
thing.
folks had some guts.
Right.
They had some
It's
courage.
just a matter of what we choose to focus on. And again, I have to stress that the difference
Well.
between the situation in Baltimore and the situation in Charleston ring on different levels. And I believe that the media will take advantage of whatever is going to pull the
So is there a
heartstrings
difference
away.
between
long-term,
Baltimore
whatever
and
the issue
Ferguson?
is, there-
It's what I'm saying is the situation with Baltimore was a black kid on the streets in a poor neighborhood with a white cop versus
There were
a
6
white
cops
kid
in Baltimore.
3 of them were black.
versus a white kid running into a predominantly black church and beating people up. And you know, we just have to think about this. We have to think about what we're being told. We have to think about how people are perceiving this in the media and what they're actually communicating to us. And all of a sudden, Baltimore has become this terrible place. But I think Baltimore is the best city in the world. I think it has a cultural, you know, diversity that is unrivaled. My entire family comes from Baltimore. It's something that I take very seriously, that we've earned this reputation in suburbia, because I don't think people live in this reputation in the city.
Well, how large percentage-wise of Baltimore was the rioting taking place in?
You know, honestly, I had businesses on Charles Street that were impacted. I had businesses, you know, within spitting distance of the harbor that were impacted. The problem is that a lot of the Baltimore business is contingent on visitors. So even if you're not talking about the ghetto, people sure as hell aren't visiting the city, period. There is a long-lasting impact of these riots that we really need to take seriously.
Thank you for those thoughts. Stay tuned, because in 3 minutes we'll be discussing the new way to HCC. Here's a hint: it's a roundabout way.